Adriana Goodwin, and I'm a citizen of the Red Lake Nation, and I have been honored to have been a part of this Capstone team working on this really important research this semester, and I'll let the rest of my team introduce themselves. Miigwech.
Hello, everyone. I'm Danny Fuker. Guess we'll just pass the mic.
I'm Henry Paddock, MERP student, master's student.
Hey, good morning, everyone. My name is Madeline Tias, a Master of Human Rights student.
And I'm a Master of Public Policy student, forgot to say. Thank you to Kyle and Madison and Shuping for their presentation, and we'll keep it going with our Capstone project. Just to quickly go over our research questions, building off of the previous semester's work, our first research question is looking at resources that have been taken from the lands, finding out if there's a monetary value that we can associate with the extraction and how we can make that information accessible. And then our second research question is, to what extent are other US universities evaluating and addressing harms done to their tribal populations? What level of support have those projects received? What barriers have they encountered? And how does the University of Minnesota compare to their peer institutions? So just as an overview, the Morrill Act land grant was just one of the land grants that's held in the Permanent University Fund. We heard about the Morrill land from Kyle, and we're just briefly going to cover two other land grants. Both of them are state-specific land grants. They're still federally granted, but only to Minnesota. And those are 1851 and 1857. Both granted 72 sections of land to the University of Minnesota. And so total of these three is about 186,000 acres of land that are all held in the Permanent University Fund. Just to get a visual here, in this map, we have the Morrill Act land grant lands in the blue parcels on the bottom there. So as Kyle was talking about, those are almost entirely on Dakota land. All of that land was sold to pay for University of Minnesota debts. And in the red, we have the red parcels are the current university land holdings that came from the 1851 and 1857 Minnesota specific land grants. The current holdings are on Ojibwe land, and not all of that land was sold. Those are our current holdings. We don't have a complete historical mapping like the Morrill land. And to fully connect that back to land cessions, this is just a map comparing the 1855, 1854, and 1837 land cessions from Ojibwe and Dakota tribes. All of those cessions were then granted to the university, and you can see on the map the overlay of current University of Minnesota land holdings and the cessions that they stem from. So all of the land grants we've just reviewed are part of the Permanent University Fund, which holds the endowment of the University of Minnesota. So money from the sale of land, as well as from resources extracted from these lands, are held in the Permanent University Fund. This picture on the slide here is from a 1916 state auditor report. So it's just to give a feel of what kind of resources were being tracked and profited off of early on. So we have land, all of the Morrill land, as we heard earlier, sale of land, sale of timber, mineral permits and leases, bonds, royalty on iron, etc. So from the fund's establishment in 1851 until 1992, the income made from investing the principal of the PUF was used to reduce the debt that was incurred in establishing a university. And in 1992, as we heard from Shuping, the PUF was split into 4 endowment accounts. And as of 2020, the total sits at 591 million. This is just a brief timeline meant to give a picture of the administration of the PUF over time, as well as where I was able to find records in case anyone wants to dig in a little deeper. From its establishment in 1851, before Minnesota was even a state, until 1963, The PUF was accounted for by the state auditor, and I was able to compile a pretty solid spreadsheet of what the fund looked like in the Minnesota Historical Society archives. That picture from the slide before was from those reports. After 1963, the administration of the PUF fund was turned over to the University of Minnesota Board of Regents, and it gets a little more difficult to find similarly detailed reports on the fund. I was able to find quarterly reports from about the 80s and 90s in the university archives, but it was more of investment style reports and not broken down by resources. And then in 1992, the endowment accounts are created, and today the Board of Regents is legislatively mandated to produce biennial reports on those endowment accounts, and the next one is expected this year. So there is so much that we can take away from looking into the Permanent University Fund. But from doing this archival and mapping research, we decided to focus on two main takeaways. The first takeaway has to do with the investment of PUF funds, which we heard a little bit about. From at least 1869, as this picture shows, the Permanent University Fund has invested in municipal bonds across the state. With my limited time, the latest example of such a bond that I found was in 1975. But there are many folders in the university archives that document these like individual bonds with low interest rates. I was finding 2 to 4% interest rates. But from early on in Minnesota's history as a state, this fund has helped to circulate money through colonial cities and counties. The aggregate records that I found don't reflect the potential return on this type of investment, but does represent money that those cities and counties could use so long as they were making their payments back. And so this type of investment likely resulted in low returns to the Permanent University Fund, but to us it has huge implications for the transfer of wealth from tribal nations and tribal land to colonists and colonial cities and counties. Our second takeaway has to do with mineral rights. In Minnesota, landowners are able to sell land and while retaining the mineral rights underneath that land. Tribes did not retain any of the mineral rights after the quote unquote sale of their lands, but the University of Minnesota did retain those mineral rights after they resold them. As a result, the university continues to bring in revenue from those lands. And I'll pass it over to Henry.
Thanks, Danny. So the DNR creates revenue from these mineral lease lands by selling or leasing the land. They lease mineral rights to mining companies, and the revenue is distributed 80% into the Permanent University Fund, and 20% of it goes to cover the Department of Natural Resources administrative costs for managing the land. And since 1891, iron and taconite leases alone on the PUF lands have accrued $184 million. This is not adjusted for inflation. I did a rough calculation of what that is in 2022 dollars, and we're looking at somewhere around $560–70 million, which is hugely significant. And this is just the mineral leases. This isn't the sale of land. This isn't return on investment. We're just talking about revenue from the mineral leases. And these maps show the university's historical mineral leases in green and the current mineral leases in red in relation to the remaining land grant lands in the Permanent University Fund, which are in black here. And the map on the right is, on the left, sorry, is Itasca County outside of Hibbing. And the one on the right is St. Louis County, about 50 miles north of Duluth. These maps illustrate that even though most of the land grant lands have been sold, there's still quite a bit of overlap between the remaining land grant lands and these mineral leases, even today. And so kind of to summarize these findings, the university has made over $180 million on land grant lands from mineral leases alone. And that's not adjusted for inflation. It does not account for the money that was made on returns from reinvesting this revenue. This number does not include the land sales or any any mineral taxes that were collected either. This is just revenue from leasing mineral rights. And additionally, this money has historically been used to provide financing to settler municipalities throughout the state, as well as being used to pay university debts. So this had huge significance in beginning the state of Minnesota and the university. And today, this money helps to reduce mining, helps to resource mining-related professorships, scholarships, and research. Given these findings, the university has the opportunity to begin investing this money in Native students and staff, as well as put together an exhaustive investigation into the history to build upon these findings. Instead of just having data available to those who can find it and connect it to the history, the university could present this in an in-depth report to the public and begin to reconcile with its history. Pass it on to Madeline now.
So as my colleagues discussed the depth of the land dispossession and extraction of minerals, I'm going to pivot a little bit to talk about university relations with tribal nations and the best practices for university action. So just centering again, my research question, or the research question was, to what extent are other US universities evaluating and addressing harms done to their tribal populations? What level of support have those projects received from their institutions? What barriers or pushback did they encounter? We're essentially wanting to know, how does the University of Minnesota compare? So then our methodology was, our goal was to identify best practices in peer institutions. Our approach was a qualitative interview. So we interviewed 9 different universities, all are seen on the right side of the screen, and did 2-hour interviews with each of the universities. So I would say this was probably one of my favorite parts of the project itself. It was really informative and also learning from the wisdom of other people. But we used purposeful sampling of educational institutions based on the client needs on the Truth Project. So, and also current relationships with tribal nations, other land-grant universities, and the relationship to the University of Minnesota. For example, like, are they in the Big Ten Conference? And as well as having a representation of geographical location. I would say, just a caveat, the University of Michigan never responded to any of our inquiries. So, but otherwise, I know Cornell in particular, as well as MIT, were also Mellon-funded institutions. So kind of going back earlier, they received similar funding that the University of Minnesota did in order to have the Truth Project. And then from our analysis, we just pulled out different themes. So key themes from our peer interviews were land acknowledgements, tribal office location, tuition support, student and faculty demographics, collection and reporting, academic programs, and Native American tribes, faculty, and students. So I'm just going to go through each of these quickly. So land acknowledgements, 7 out of the 9 peer institutions had land acknowledgements. This tab code is from the University of Oregon, that a land acknowledgement is like someone who stole your bike, acknowledged that they stole it, and still rode off with it. And so it's a critical first step, very important first step. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure that it requires administrative support and funding post land acknowledgement and throughout the entire process. We found that when a land acknowledgement is created by university with tribal input is really important, as well as the opportunity for University of Minnesota is that it's my understanding that tribes have come together and written a land acknowledgement, as well as given it to the University of Minnesota. And that is currently sitting in committees right now at the university. So really making sure that they push forward and continue the momentum and not just stop at a certain point. And below is an example of the University of Arizona's land acknowledgement. They coordinated or consulted with 2 local tribes in drafting this. And they went over through the course of 11 meetings. And so, like, while it's a 3 or 4 sentence land acknowledgement, it's critical to have that tribal input in it. So our second key theme was tribal relations and tribal relation office location. So 4 out of the other universities had their office location in the president's office. We find that this is important because, like, if the president of the United States came to the university, they wouldn't be hosted by the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Office. They would be hosted by the president. And so recognizing not only the sovereignty of tribal nations, but also that they are tribes and sovereign nations and need to have that nation to institution relationship, not as a DEI initiative. So the power dynamics also at play at the president's office is important. And currently the University of Minnesota has its office location in the president's office. So it's kind of a good thumbs up there, but there's more work to be done. So for tuition support, 2 out of our 9 peer organizations have some degree of tuition support for Native students. It's important to note that the University of Minnesota, the Native American Promise Tuition Program, is based on need-based, not on affinity-based. And so families that make under $70,000 annually have to, or are the ones that qualify for the full tuition, with a caveat that family incomes over $125,000 are no longer eligible. So it's kind of proposed as an affinity base or promoted, but in reality, it's not. And so, for example, a huge at University of Hawaii has a program where Native Hawaiian faculty teach courses and incorporate Hawaiian ways of being and knowledge into core courses, which are only offered to Native Hawaiian students over the summer. So while they don't have a tuition waiver program, they offer additional ways for Native students to be involved in their university and with Native faculty. Oregon State Legislature also passed a budget that offers a supplemental cost of attendance, which also includes room and board after other federally funded and private scholarships are applied. Currently, it's only covered for 1 year and has to be re-evaluated or repassed. So it's not like a full-on kind of initiative, but they also have graduate scholarships for 2 years for Native students of any discipline. So the opportunity for University of Minnesota is to expand the affinity-based Morse tuition waiver that is currently in place at the Morse campus to the entire University of Minnesota system and offer other non-academic supports, such as reciprocity, also to include tribes who were forced to move into the North and South Dakota borders during different treaties. So the choice is not where to go to college, but if. Oh, the choice is where to go to college, not if. Sorry about that. So the next theme was admission identification. So currently this very much varies across all universities. Sadly, a lot of universities don't know how many Native students attend, don't know what tribes they're affiliated, don't know if they're citizens or just kind of affiliated as Native. And so you can see 6 of the institutions use self-identification, 2 use tribal identification. So where students have list their tribe as well as their citizenship status. And 1 is inconsistent, which is really interesting. Like, for example, Brown University says that the data has data privacy over the total number of Native students, but then in the same form will list the Native students by tribe. So a little confusing on what numbers are, but some universities also prioritize race when classifying 2 or more and will automatically slot 1 into one or the other. So multiracial people don't count in certain categories, which is very unfortunate. Some universities, once again with data privacy, but it's really cool because the University of Oregon was the one that pioneered this, where they asked for tribal affiliation and citizenship number in order to really build the community and know which students are coming from which tribes in order to create fellowship and to create those relationships. So opportunity for University of Minnesota, expand admission demographics to include tribal affiliation and citizenship. So peer academic programs. Well, our research went more in depth into a lot of these into this table. This is a key area because where the university spends their money to build their academics is also where their priority is. And so as you can see, the University of Minnesota only offers a major at this point, but other universities have PhDs, have masters. Unfortunately, some don't have anything and others just have minors or certificates. And so it's important for the institution to have robust self-criticism and reconcile with their own history with Native populations such as this project. And it's really an opportunity for University of Minnesota to put their money where their mouth is, or to build up this program to be intergenerational, but also to be a master's and PhD level program. So to our last theme of Native students and faculty, Native students and faculty are underrepresented at all peer institutions. is also the University of Minnesota has no way of knowing how many Native faculty are currently on campus, or they don't make that publicly available. The number I did find was like after me digging for like 2 hours on the university website, so it's not readily available either. And a lot of these numbers range. For example, 90 to 310 is a pretty big range, or 21 to 500. So there isn't really a way to know, but at the same time, even the higher estimates are still underrepresented. So I would say this also comes into a part where geography matters. Whereas you see on East Coast cities such as Brown or Cornell and stuff, you see the cultural erasure a lot more prevalent. Whereas at University of Arizona, you have more robust Native communities, as well as having that seen through, whereas the process of colonization as westward expansion happened, universities follow that same historical trend. And so I think I'll pass it off to Adriana.
So some additional insights that we received from the various interviews that we conducted. A big one was institutional will. And so that's where individuals in leadership positions really utilizing their power within the institution as a catalyst for change. We heard from various interviews where they had a project that they wanted done, and with the support of the administration, they got it done. And so that was a really big takeaway for us. Another really big takeaway was that the needs of American Indian students are unique. Representation matters. When we see people that look like us, that talk like us, and those kinds of things, we do better. We're more prosperous. And another thing is that Indigenous ways of knowing have equal value to Western academia, and really just placing the value and emphasis on that is really important. Another really important thing is that we need a space to gather. We need a space, again, where there's images and pictures on the walls that are representative of who we are as a people. Even the space that we're creating today, seeing all of you guys out there is a really beautiful thing. It makes me feel more comfortable as we're presenting. And so thank you for showing up today. Another thing that we found, or that we know, is that Indigenous peoples are less visible to the broader public. When we were interviewing Brown University, the person that we interviewed made a comment that people don't even know we exist. And so that's the same story across the country, is that we're fighting so hard to be visible. Another really important thing is that we need creative programs unique to the context of the land and to the space and to the university. And another really important thing is that we need access to the research and to the archives. So kind of to restate, the first research question is, in addition to the land itself, resources have been taken. Is there a monetary value that we can associate with this research extraction? Again, to kind of highlight what Danny and Henry mentioned, was that we really encourage the university to design a self-study to identify strategies for strengthening tribal relations. There is exhaustive documentation of the permanent university funds and other funds stemming from tribal lands that we still don't have benefit from to this day. And again, there is an opportunity for a creative use of the permanent use of university fund for tribal investment. Money made from mineral rights could fund these tribal endowed chairs or scholarship or research. And another opportunity for the university is continued funding of an expanded promise tuition waiver. To restate the second research question that we focused on, to what extent are other U.S. universities evaluating and addressing harms done to their tribal populations? What levels of support have those projects received from their institutions? What barriers or pushback did they encounter? So some key takeaways from the data we collected from this research question is that, land acknowledgement is really important. But again, there needs to be that tribal consultation. There needs to be tribal people included in that process. And beyond the tuition-based waiver, we really encourage an affinity-based waiver. It's really important that our Native students have all of the supports that they need, whether that be childcare, housing, etc. And another really important thing is to improve the admission data. It's really critical, important that we know where our students are coming from, so we can better curtail the needs of our academic programming to best meet the needs of our Native American students. Again, to build out the academic programming of master's and PhD levels. And another really important thing that I mentioned before is that representation matters. We need more Native staff and faculty. Again, we're more successful when we see people that look like us, that talk like us, that know, or what community is and how important that is to Indigenous peoples. And another opportunity is for more administrative funding and student level support. So throughout this whole process, we really felt as a team, it was really important to include this in it. And just the way in which that we engaged with this research was that we really recognized that this project was really important. And I really want to commend my team for the humility and for the thoughtfulness that they've put on this project, being non-Native researchers. So thank you. We wanted the Capstone project to genuinely help the Truth Project by building that relationship and building that trust with our client, meeting back and forth with them, offering questions, getting our questions answered. It was just really important to center the needs of our client as we engaged in this process. And another thing with this project is that, these are really painful, traumatic topics for many of us. Conducting the interviews took a lot of thoughtfulness and patience. And again, really centering that we were guests in their space. And so really being mindful of the cultural sensitivity that needs to take place when working with tribal people and tribal nations. Another really complex thing was the Permanent University Fund. You guys kind of got a little bit of that about the way in which the University of Minnesota has really generated massive amounts of wealth off of the land grab that took place here. And it's still really difficult to understand, and we're just touching the surface of all of this. There's so much more to know. And again, as Madeline mentioned before, the trends that have been followed from that westward expansion, you can really see that in the institution today. With that, I'd like to thank again the Cura team before us and the rest of the Capstone team, Professor Greg Lindsay. Yeah, miigwech.